Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and this video will showcase the fastest cars in the GTA 5 Sedans class, organised first of all by race tier and then by lap time within each tier, with the top speed of each vehicle also shown in order to identify any outliers. All 38 sedans have been put through their paces on my testing track and top speed run, and we'll be going from the slowest L tier cars to the top S tier in this video. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on future testing of new vehicles added to GTA 5 and beyond, and check out all other classes in the playlist. This video is brought to you by the YouTube area of my website. Check out every single video series I've done categorised by game type alongside chronological playlists and extra info at bruffy.com/YouTube. So as we see the vehicles in the sedans class that aren't usable in regular races, it's important for me to let you know that the intro video to this series, which is linked in the description and pinned comment, likely answers any questions you have about this testing. From simple things like what car upgrades are needed to maximise performance and what HSW stands for, to more complicated things like why I use off-road wheels and overall testing methodologies. Give that video a watch if there's anything you don't understand here, since everything there is assumed knowledge for this video. So we're starting off with tier L, the very first tier, and it's only got one car in it, the Regina, of course. It is the slowest for both lap time and top speed, with an 86.25 miles per hour top speed is one of the slowest that we've seen in any of the classes so far. Yeah, not an awful lot to write home about with the Regina. Tier K has two cars in it, but they're essentially the same vehicle with the Emperor and the Emperor Beta. A little bit quicker than the Regina, although I guess you could say significantly quicker given how slow we are at this point. But, you know, nothing special. Again, you're not going to be using these in races unless you restrict yourself to a K tier race, for example. But you could use either of them because they are both identical in terms of performance, basically. Now when we come on to the J tier, that also has two vehicles, and at the start of this class we are going to see some smaller tiers as we go through some of the slowest cars, but then we start to see some pretty decently sized tiers later on in the video. The Romero hearse is a little bit off the pace in the J tier in comparison to the Ingot. You know, they're very similar in terms of their performance. The Romero hearse is a little bit quicker for top speed but worse for lap time. They're both very slow, but yeah, ultimately it's better to put them together in a tier, and you can, you know, use the Romero hearse if you want to do a bit of a spice pick for that one. The Stafford is all on its own in tier I, and it's only the second car in the class that has the same position for lap time as it does for top speed, alongside the Regina obviously that we saw earlier, which was last for both and also alone in its own tier. Another two car tier again with H, so we're rocketing through the tiers here with basically the two Cognoscentes, the armoured version and the regular version. They're both not identical for performance like with the Emperor and the Emperor Beta, but they're certainly very close. The armoured version of the Cognoscente isn't as far away from the regular Cognoscente as some other armoured versions of vehicles in the game. Now tier G, and this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting, and tier G is probably one of the more interesting tiers in the class. It's got three very different cars. The Super Diamond first up with that huge top speed, 7th for the class, all the way down here despite being 28th for lap time, but it lacks a lot of grip. The Surge has great acceleration and reasonable grip but no top end, which is what we'll see in a second, and then the Acia sits basically in the middle of the two on all of the metrics. Most of the time the Acia will be the best pick for this tier, but the big top speed advantage that Super Diamond has, or the relatively great acceleration of the electric Surge, do have the chance to make them the best cars depending on the track, so it's a really interesting tier, that one. Now on to tier F, which is a little bit less interesting in terms of variety of cars, but the three cars that are here are great to drive and absolute classics. Starting with the Premier with a 114.3, it's only just under 0.4 of a second slower than the top car, so it's a very close compacted tier as well. The Stratum is next up with a 114.1, so you know, about 0.2 of a second quicker than the Premier, but they're all very, very close, these three, and you could use any of them really in a F tier race if you restrict yourself to the F tier. Ultimately the Glendale is probably going to be the pick most of the time, but it can be one of the more difficult ones to extract the lap time from. But yeah, three really great cars here, really nice to drive even though they're pretty slow. They quite often go overlooked, but it's a great tier, that one, in terms of the cars that you can race with. Now it's time for Tier E, which is the biggest in the class with 7 cars, which is kind of incredible to be honest, because 7 cars in a class that has, sort of 40-ish cars around it, that's quite a lot to have so compacted close together. Although the Stania is more of a spice pick though, it does lack a little bit of speed compared to the rest, but it's better to put it in here than just have it on its own. The 2 Cognoscenti 5.5s are also kind of more situational, I would say, because they do certainly struggle for grip in comparison to some of the really high grip sedans that we see in this tier, but they have a much higher top speed. They're in the top 10 for top speed in the whole class, and they certainly have a lot better top speed than the other cars in this tier, so that means that they will come into their own and potentially even be dominant in the tier depending on the track type. If there's a track with a lot more longer straights, the 2 Cognoscenti 5.5s are the ones to pick, although the armoured versions of these vehicles are generally, there's no point in having them because the regular versions are always a little bit quicker. The rest of the vehicles are sort of what you would consider standard sedans in terms of the grip levels and the lap times that we get. The Asterope, for example, the bog standard Asterope, followed up by the Warrener HKR, which is actually slower than the old Warrener, so the new tuner Warrener. I think it's the slowest in the tuners class, the HKR. And then we've got the Washington, which has a big grip. Not that great for straight line performance, but it's that classic sedan feel of a lot of grip. And then ultimately the best car for the tier is the regular Warrener. That 112.3 is a really decent lap time. It lacks a little bit on the top speed front, which allows the other cars to be competitive, but great little car, the Warrener, and certainly my pick for the E tier. For the D tier, we've got 4 cars starting again. These are this is that sort of area of the sedans class where you see typical bog standard sedans. We saw the Asterope and the Washington in the previous tier. We're seeing stuff like the Intruder here, the Primo, sedans that have been in the game since the game was released in 2013, and they're what you would more consider to be sedans, like in terms of the way that they used to be back in the day. In terms of sedans, always had lackluster top speed but really big grip, and they were always some of the grippiest cars to race with. The Primo Custom is basically, it's very similar to the regular Primo. It's a little bit quicker, but ultimately you could take either of them and get very similar performance. But the best vehicle for this tier would usually be the Fugitive, depending on the track type. It's a more consistent performer in comparison to the rest, but it is very close in this tier. Alright, Tier C only has 1 car in it, and it's the car that's always been alone in the sedans class, the Tailgater. The Tailgater has always had really great grip, like many other sedans around this area, but it really suffers for top speed, with only 105 miles per hour down in 25th place overall, just missing out on the top 10 overall for sedans for lap time. Alright, 5 cars make up Tier B, starting with the DiNmiTe, which struggles for grip, but it does have a much better top speed than the rest in this tier, so that's why it manages to scrape into Tier B. But one of the 5 cars here isn't even a sedan, as we see the first instance of a car that's usable in sedan races, but it's actually in the sports class with the Shafter LWB non-armoured version. So it should have been the 2 V12 Shafters that were in the sports class with the 2 LWBs in sedans based on their pace and how they were. But when they were introduced, Rockstar mistakenly put the 2 armoured versions in sedans and the 2 normal versions in sports instead. Later on, they tried to correct it a little bit by making the non-armoured versions also available in sedan races, and that's why the Shafter LWB, despite being actually in the sports class, can also be used in sedan races. Ultimately though, the top of the B tier consists of the newer Glendale Custom, which is a pretty decent performer as well. Just remember that you've got to add the secondary colour trunk to the back of it for extra traction, same is true for the regular Glendale. But it's only 16 thousandths of a second slower than the old king of the sedans class with the regular Shafter. So even though it's not at the very top of the class anymore, it is at least top of something in the class with the B tier. And I would say it is probably the best car to use most of the time for B tier races, and in most instances as well. We take a pretty decent gap of around 1.5 seconds in lap time to our 2 newest sedans to be added to the class that are together in the A tier and make up a brand new tier just for themselves. First of all, the Asterope GZ with a 107.2, like I say, it's a pretty decent jump in lap time from what we saw from the Shafter. And also the newest sedan with the Impaler SZ, it's basically a 1/10 of a second ahead of the Asterope, but also has a better top speed as well, so most of the time the Impaler SZ is the one to use for A-tier races, but it's significantly far off the top S tier, because we take an even bigger jump of lap time from the best that the A tier has to offer to S, with an almost 2.5 second lap time improvement to what is probably the best top tier of any class, with 5 cars separated by less than 2/10 of a second. This also applies to all platforms as well, by the way, since there's no HSW cars to be seen anywhere in this class, for now anyway. We've got, first of all, the Shafter V12 Armoured with a 104.7, and we're only going to get up to a 104.5 by the end of these 5 cars. It's absolutely crazy how close they are. It is the number 1 for Sedans class in terms of top speed, the V12 Armoured, and following it up from that, we've got the second place for top speed in sedans with the Reinhardt. So the Reinhardt and the V12 Armoured, they're pretty close in terms of pace and performance. You know, there's only 1/1000th of a second between them in lap time, and the Reinhardt is good enough for 3rd place in the sedans class for lap time. But certainly the Reinhardt and the V12 Armoured struggle a little bit for grip in comparison to some of the other cars, but their top speeds allow them to compete. The opposite is true for the Tailgater S, which does really well to get into 2nd place for the sedans class with a 104.7 as well, so it's less than a 10th quicker than the Reinhardt. But just like its, you know, older brother, the regular Tailgater, it really struggles for top speed. 116 mph might be good enough for 5th place in the class overall, but it's really slow compared to some of the other S tier cars. So it's all about the grip with the Tailgater S, and don't use it on a track that's got any long straights. The second instance of a car that's in a different class being able to be used in sedan races is up next, and it's with the Shafter V12. About a 1/10 of a second quicker in terms of lap time than the Tailgater S. It's incredible that it's still relevant in the sedans class. The V12 used to be dominant, but now we've got 4 other cars that can actually compete with it, and it's pretty crazy to see. That huge 126 mph top speed as well is actually the quickest that what you can get in sedan races, but ultimately it is a true full-blooded sedan that can be used in sedan races that is the best with the 5.0. 104.581 is only a fraction quicker than what the Shafter V12 was able to do, but this is actually a car that is in the sedans class, and it's 1st place for sedans and sedan races as well, only by a fraction though, and because its top speed isn't anywhere close to what the Shafter V12 can do, it's an interesting balance between the two, and that's what we'll see from the side-by-side comparison. I've chosen to use those top 2 because they are so incredibly close in terms of lap time, and you'll see that basically the 5.0 generally has slightly better acceleration out of slow speed corners, and it's certainly got the better grip and it's more consistent, but the Shafter V12 has that incredible top speed that pulls it back in. So the Shafter V12 gets an early advantage in the lap because of that top speed at the start, but then the 5.0 catches up and passes it throughout the rest of the lap, utilising its better grip, and then the Shafter V12 catches back up again on the final back straight to the point where they're, you know, basically neck and neck crossing the line. And it's really interesting to see how they both build up their laps. I would say that from the S tier, the Reinhardt is probably the easiest to drive, although the 5.0 is probably a close second, whereas the Shafter V12 is one of the more difficult ones to extract that kind of lap time out of. So in terms of consistency, the V12 probably isn't the one to pick, but it also has that incredibly high top speed that is basically the best for sedan races. So you've got that in your back pocket if you choose to use it, certainly, and there's a track that has, you know, a lot more long straights, and as we'll see here, you can see the comparison between the two. So yeah, it's interesting that we've got this now. We've got a lot of new sedans, and I'm surprised the Tailgater S really managed to get into the S tier as well, but we've got a lot of new sedans that have basically matched what the Shafter V12 has always been able to do, and that's really nice to see. So a really interesting top tier for sedans. And that's everything for this video. Please consider supporting on Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want to support this work and get some extra perks for doing so, such as early access to videos and other testing results. And remember to read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed or found it helpful, and subscribe for more. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.